to 100 years away. Some people believe it will never happen, that it will never occur. Other people believe 50 to 100 years, where we will be able to build models that are tens of thousands of times smarter than the collective intelligence in this room. So let me give you an example of just some of these models that are out there now. This is the first FDA-approved AI application in healthcare. And it is a device for diagnosing diabetic retinopathy. And it's a device for primary care providers to use. People with diabetes are at significant risk for retinopathy. And what this device does is it takes an image, it takes a photograph of the fundus of the eye, and the AI will look at this image and say to the primary care provider, this fundus is okay, this retina is okay, or this patient needs to be referred to an ophthalmologist. So primary care providers are an ophthalmologist. That's essentially what this is. It's an assist for primary care docs. In fact, it's not an assist. It replaces their judgment. That's really important, by the way, in terms of whether or not these devices are or are not going to be FDA regulated. If all the device is just a reminder, you know, Dr. Schmo, Mrs. Higgins' biopsies just came back from the lab. You need to look at them and contact her. If that's all it is, it's not going to be an FDA. You're not going to need FDA approval for something like that. On the other hand, if the device said Mrs. Higgins' biopsies just came back, I looked at them. They're clear. Do you want me to generate a report to her referring physician? You're going to need FDA approval for that, because that replaces the judgment of a doctor. And that's a very crude example that I just gave you, by the way, but you get the idea.
Any data on the accuracy?
Took the words right out of my mouth. What he said was any data on the accuracy. And what I was going to say was, so what's the accuracy? What did the FDA have to come up with in terms of the accuracy whereby they approved this device for diagnosing diabetic retinopathy? Anybody want to guess? What was the gold standard that the FDA used in order to say, yeah, we can put this in primary care providers' offices, and this can replace a primary care provider? The standard of care. This, what would be the accuracy of a primary care provider in looking at your fundus and saying, looks good, or you need to go see an ophthalmologist? And that's what it's going to be. I mean, the standard of care, which is, by the way, a very interesting ethical and legal point. All we can ask a healthcare professional, a nurse, a doctor, a therapist, all we can ask of him or her, ethically and legally, is, are you going to perform your tasks according to the standard of care? Can I expect you to deliver the standard of care to me when I come to see you as a patient? And what is the standard of care? It is simply what would an ordinary, reasonable, prudent nurse or doctor do under like or similar circumstances. That's it. What would an ordinary, reasonable, prudent doctor do in like or similar circumstances? And that's the criterion, by the way, that clinician is going to be judged by if he or she is ever sued, taken to court. That doctor, that nurse is going to bring their expert witnesses, and they're going to say, yes, Dr. Banja comported with the standard of care. The plaintiffs are going to bring their expert witnesses, and they're going to say, absolutely not. Horrible, deplorable, outrageous. And that's the way malpractice trials go. So, yeah, and then the jury goes to the deliberation room, they hear both sides, and then they decide which side is more believable. By the way, actually cases that go all the way to a malpractice trial, by 5%. Most are settled out of court, and many of them are dropped. All right, so diabetic retinopathy. This was a study that really hit the headlines, came out of Silicon Valley, and basically an AI was trained to differentiate cancerous from non-cancerous skin lesions. So the AI was trained to differentiate keratinocyte carcinomas from benign seborrheic keratoses, and to differentiate malignant melanomas from benign nevi. And the way they train these algorithms, and I really don't, I may sound like I know what I'm talking about, I don't. But the way they train these algorithms is they feed them images with regard to these image interpretation kinds of studies. They feed them images and they'll tell the algorithm, all right, this is a benign seborrheic keratosis. Okay? And what the algorithm does is it breaks down the pixels. And you just keep telling the machine what these things are. This is cancerous, this is non-cancerous. And it builds up a prototype somewhere in its computer noodle. And then after you train the machine on tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of images, then you test the machine. You give it an image and you say, all right, what is this? Is this a cancerous skin lesion or not? Is this a diabetic retinopathy or not? And you test how accurate the machine is. So you've already labeled that. You already know what the answer is, and that's the way you determine the accuracy of the algorithm. There are all kinds of problems in training an algorithm. And I'll give you a really good example of one. And by the way, could I get a glass of water? Or let me ask Diana. Diane, could you give me some water, please? So they wanted to train an algorithm to identify pneumonia. So, thank you. So they trained it on tens of thousands of images, and it got real good. And the way they do it is they might get 50,000 images from, let's say, Emory. And they'll train the algorithm on 45,000 of those images. They'll train it. This is a pneumonia lung, this is not a pneumonia lung. And then they'll take those 5,000 images that they have left, and then they'll test it on those images, right? Well, when they tested it on these 5,000 images, it was really good. This is just as good as a board-certified doc. Then they got a whole bunch of images from another institution or another healthcare system. It was awful. Awful. What's the problem? The problem was the first batch of images that they trained the machine on were all images taken from pneumonia patients or non-pneumonia patients who were standing up. The second set of images were taken of patients who were lying down. And the algorithm just totally kerfluffed. I mean, it just couldn't read those second set of images. So it's that kind of, the stuff you don't think of, that kind of nuance and subtlety that you really have to train these algorithms relentlessly in order for them to achieve that kind of accuracy. At any rate, this model, which is probably continues to be tested, it was compared with, tested against 21 board-certified dermatologists. The CNN, that's convolutional neural network, achieves performance on par with all tested experts across just the two tasks now. So you think about all the different skin lesions a dermatologist has got to look at. All this AI was able to do were just these two, right? That's all they taught it to do. But at any rate, it was pretty doggone good. This is an AI model that just shows you how these can assist, in this particular case, radiologists, in terms of looking at presentations that are occult, eccentric, just, hey, doc, look at this. So same picture of a pneumonia lung, I beg pardon, a tubercular lung. Yeah, a tubercular lung. And this is what it would look like on the plain X-ray. But when they sent it through this AI-modified heat map, right here, look, this does not look right. And so, I mean, you don't have to be a board-certified radiologist to attend to something like that. So, oh, and this is an interesting one. So this is called Deep Patient. And rather than look at images, what they did with this device was train it on language. They fed the AI patient records. As a matter of fact, gazillions of patient records. Records that were collected from 1.6 million patients. So I mean, every patient had like 100 pages of records. Can you imagine all the data that was going into this machine? But this is what AI is good at. IBM's Watson can analyze 200 million pages of text in 3 seconds. I mean, that's what it's good at, right? So 1.6 million patients, their records, treated at Mount Sinai for those 33 years between 1980 and 2013. And what they wanted to do was to see if they could train this model to be as diagnostically sophisticated as basically an internist or any physician, seeing these patients. So the test set now, I mean, the education set was gazillions of records. The test set included 100,000 patients in their records in 2014, and they looked at 79 different diseases. And so after they trained the model, they then fed the model a patient presentation, a patient record, and they asked them, what's going on here? What is your diagnosis? And the diagnostic things, again, there were 79 of them. But the diagnostic categories were things like diabetes, rectal cancer, liver cancer, congestive heart failure, prostate cancer, schizophrenia, those kinds of things, 79. The AI achieved a pretty stunning accuracy. The results were compared with other predictive techniques, such as the raw electronic health record. And I don't know what these things, Mike Kuttner knows what these things are. Principal component analysis, I don't know what the hell they are. But at any rate, it outperformed them all, producing an area under the curve of 0.79 versus other methods. So pretty promising technology, promising stuff. So this is what I think. And I see you've got Noel Harari's Homo Deus there. So this is around chapter 9, I think, in Homo Deus. Harari thinks that the visit to your primary care provider 30, 40 years from now is going to look something like this. You're going to walk into the office and maybe you will be greeted by a human being. Maybe. At any rate, after you do the formalities and all that, you will be guided over to probably a computer console. And just like when you go to your QT and you stick your credit card into the gas tank, you'll stick your healthcare card into the computer console. On your healthcare card will be everything about you. Everything. Your medical history, your pharmacy, your drug history, maybe even your personality profile, all your DNA, all this stuff. And that's why you need artificial intelligence, because no human being could keep all this information in mind. So you stick that in, and then on the monitor, a face appears. And I chose Anderson Cooper because I think he looks like a robot. But you can choose whoever you want. You can choose whoever you want. And Anderson will say, John, good morning. What brings you here today? And I'll say, I got a cough or I got a sore throat. And Anderson will say, all right, just put your head over here at the brace and let me take a look. And lights will go, open up your mouth, and then they'll do all the, maybe there'll be a human being come over and take a picture of in my ears and up my nose and other bodily orifices or whatever. Give me a urine sample, we'll take a blood sample and all that. And then the AI will just rock and roll will rock and roll with all this stuff. And by the way, its calculations and computations will be synced with a humongous database like PubMed, just to make sure that it's getting it right. And then you get an output. Well, John, there's an 89% chance that you have a viral infection, and I would prescribe something just like and if you'd like, I'll send a prescription, I'll send an order in for you for your CVS, which I know is on 5 Forks Trigger Road in Snowville. Would you like me to do that? Yeah, and I'll charge your card. And that's it. That's your office visit. It's going to last about 5 minutes. No wait, no fuss, no muss. Accuracy, fantastic. Maybe 20, 30, 40 years from now. I think that's what something like that might look like. Right now, lots of bugs in these machines, though, in these programs. And I'll just give you one example of how difficult it is to train these algorithms. This is a story that made international news. This is Richard Lee, and Richard went to get a passport actually renewed for himself, and I believe this happened in New Zealand. Richard went into the passport office. He needed to get a picture. And the machine, the AI, refused to take a picture of him. He needed to get the picture to have it compared with terrorists and all of that kind of stuff. That's how they use the AI. The machine refused to take a picture because the machine said, you have to open your eyes. Okay. And you got your eyes closed. So you see, the problem is that the algorithm was not trained on enough images of Asian folks, right, who had narrow eye openings. So those are the kinds, that's just one example of the difficulty of getting a generalized or representative sample. Here's some of the stuff that I'm working on right now. I'm working on collecting case studies of AI that are troublesome. And see what you think of this one. Jim arrives at a job interview. After filling out a few forms, he's led into a nicely furnished room where he meets his interviewer. After a few welcoming remarks, the interviewer asks Jim if he would consent to his interview being videotaped. The reason, says the interviewer, is the company is trying to improve the interview process, especially in terms of hiring the right people for the right job. The interviewer explains that the videos are computer analyzed with the hope that the computer model can predict which job applicants will have a better fit in the organization. This is not apocryphal. Companies are using this right now. The video looks at your body language, it listens to how you respond, how you talk, and it attempts to compare how the presentation is with presumably whether you're going to succeed at that particular job or not. The interviewer assures Jim that his refusal of this videotaping interview would in no way jeopardize the chance of his receiving a job offer. He is told his decision is entirely voluntary and that the videotaping is basically a quality improvement project. Jim had no idea this request was coming, but he feels that if he declined the requests, despite what he's told, his chance of being offered a position would diminish. Jim says it's okay to videotape the interview proceeds. Jim exits the interview feeling it has gone well. So, just rhetorically.
Is this honest that there's no way it jeopardizes his chance?
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? You know, I mean, suppose you were Jim, you know, and, you know, but there's no way this is going to prejudice our evaluation of your, are you going to believe me? Or are you not going to believe? I know I'm a very believable person, right? But other people are not. You want to see a variation of this one? Look at this next one. Jim arrives at a job interview. Now remember, he's asked in this first example whether it's okay to videotape or not, right? Look at this next one. Jim arrives at a job interview. After completing some paperwork, he's led to an interviewer who is seated in the building's outdoor courtyard. The courtyard is a very public place with numerous walkways and plenty of people milling about. The weather is excellent. And Jim is asked by the interviewer if it's okay to do the interview there. Unbeknownst to Jim, his interview is being videotaped. The company is conducting AI research to see if an algorithm can develop that better predicts, on the basis of the interviewee's body language and verbal responses, which job applicants will make for better hires. Jim has not asked for consent to be videotaped because the company's legal experts have assured human resources that public events, such as Jim's outdoor interview, are not protected by privacy rules. Moreover, Jim has been told that any confidential information he reveals during the interview will be protected and not shared with anyone who has no right or need to know it. The interview proceeds, and Jim leaves feeling it has gone well. What do you do with that one? All right, jobs. The way I learned it, technology has historically almost always resulted, powerful technology, important, valuable technology has almost always resulted in an increase in jobs. And the way I learned it was the reason why is because What the technology allows you to do is increase productivity, and assuming that you got a market out there for your products, more people will buy your products because now the productivity has increased, more money will come back to the company will get larger, and jobs will increase. The worry is that's not going to happen with artificial intelligence, because the increase in jobs is going to be taken over by AI models and technologies themselves. Whereas human beings took over in the past for that job, made up for that job increase. In the future, the worry is it's going to be the AI that really does this. And in answer to the question, is my job going to disappear or not? The answer, the best answer, I think, is it depends. If your job is one wherein you do lots of very different things, I do this and this and this and this and this, and sometimes I do that, but it's unpredictable whether I do that or not. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. By the way, it takes a very sophisticated skill set to do that. Probably not. Your job is safe. If you do the same thing over and over and over, and you sit in front of the computer screen over and over, and you've said to yourself a gazillion times, you know what, a relatively smart computer could do what I do. I pay me $60,000 a year to do this. That's the job that's on the chopping block. That's the job that's on the chopping block. There are a whole coterie of jobs, though, that are really questionable as to whether you would think in one respect they probably will disappear. In another respect, maybe not. I'll give you two good examples. Number one, bartending. Right? Already now, I'm told there are machines in restaurants that will produce a glass of wine for you. You don't have to order a glass of wine. The expectation is that in the future, you may go to Emmanuel's Tavern and, you know, just like you go into your fast food now and the clerk asks you, do you want a drink? Yeah. She hands you an empty cup. You go to the Coke machine and there's like, 30 different icons there. My grandson usually taps 4 of them. Makes this sugar duff charge. Well, the thinking is that's the way some taverns are going to be in the future. You'll go over to the machine. You want a Bloody Mary? Put your glass in there. Hit that. You want a gin and tonic? Boom. And that'll do it. Give you another example. Hotel clerks. I mean, think about it. 9 times out of 10, when you go into a hotel, you walk up to this person. Can I see some ID and your credit card, please? Okay. Mrs. Higgins, yes, we have your room. Here's your room key. Do you want me to charge your credit card? Very good. Enjoy your stay. That's what they do 9 times out of 10. Well, for heaven's sakes, a machine can replace these people. But here's the pushback, also on the tavern. In fact, take the tavern example. Maybe Manuel from Manuel's Tavern would say, I'd never replace a bartender, even if it was cost effective for me to do that. I mean, when people come into Manuel's Tavern, they want to be greeted with a friendly face, a smile, all that kind of stuff. You can never approximate that with a machine, for heaven's sake. And maybe Mr. Marriott or Mr. Hyatt or whoever, same thing. When Banja, comes into a hotel after a wearisome flight, wants to be greeted with a nice face. I want to keep that person there. So a lot of people are thinking that it's not going to be, by the way, even those lower level jobs right now that are so much challenged or threatened by AI, it may very well be a lot of white collar, middle income jobs that are going to be the ones that are the most threatened. Automation is a huge threat here. This is a Toyota plant in Japan where the cars are built from soup to nuts by robots. So it's really not jobs migrating offshore in the United States, and it hasn't largely been for the last 20 years. It's been automation that's been filling the bill. So the jobs that are really slated for or predicted to go the way of the dinosaur: banking industry, bank tellers, loan officers, customer service reps, financial managers. And, you know, you see this in the literature, but I checked up on this stuff yesterday. And guess what? There's an old Danish saying, by the way, that goes, making predictions is difficult, especially about the future. And I looked at this yesterday. As a matter of fact, bank tellers have not only not seen any erosion in their job numbers have gone up. And the reason why is as more people use ATMs, you're building more banks and you need to staff them. And consequently, the job tellers have not experienced anything like this. So we'll see. But if you look at the forecasters and the predictors, the people who are on the jobs that may go, like I say, the way of the dinosaur, the loan officers, reception clerks, paralegal assistants, lawyers who do nothing but contracts all day long. AI can do contracts. Taxi drivers and chauffeurs, delivery people, autonomous vehicles. As a matter of fact, the thinking is that in 20, 30 years, most people will not own a car. If you think about it, owning an automobile from an economic perspective is relatively inefficient. The doggone car just sits there 99% of the time, doesn't do anything, right? But you're making your monthly payment and you're making your insurance payment and all that kind of stuff. So what's going to happen 20, 30 years from now? Everything will be automated. Uber. You won't own a car. You need to get out of here. You just call your Uber up. Uber will come pick you up, take you to wherever it is you need to go. Hairdressers, jobs that might be safe. Can you imagine a robot cutting your hair? But that's a good example, I think, of jobs that look like they're safe. Higher mathematics, theoretical physics, academic jobs. You know, well, I'm going to talk about this, and actually I'm almost done. And also jobs requiring face-to-face interactions, food service, janitorial work, childcare, those kinds of jobs. Some people believe that all of this stuff that, we're going to see an enormous erosion in jobs is malarkey. And they believe that AI is going to be one of the greatest job engines that the world has ever seen. And I thought this was charming, so I wanted to share it with you. Some people think that the safest job that's out there right now, da 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 da. Cute. All right. This is a picture of the Martian surface. And the thinking is, though, that if AI over the next 30 years is imported to the extent that they think it will be, this transition from job loss to job recovery will not be smooth. Here's what you're looking at. Loss of job will mean a loss of income. Loss of income will mean spending will decrease, productivity will decline, prices will drop, companies will fold. And on top of that, AI may decrease operational costs, which will only lessen jobs and job hours all the more. Will we see this movement in the West from full-time to temporary? So these are, some of the things that our children and our grandchildren are going to have to deal with. What we should start thinking about right now are things like, is our current curriculum, especially in our K through 12 schools, preparing our youngsters for the kinds of careers that they're going to have? I will tell you, in healthcare, if AI technologies really start impacting our hospitals, our clinics, these healthcare professionals are going to be on a learning curve for the rest of their careers. So are we prepared for that? Are we going to be able to do that? Lifelong learning, perhaps for everyone, and initiating STEM training in K through 12. Work. We may see a transition from jobs to work. What will you do when you don't have to? I know some youngsters in their 30s who appear not to have a passion for anything. And you probably know them too. What are they going to do when the time comes when you can choose what you want to do? Lastly, this AI of the future, the thinking is that 30, 50, 100 years from now, AI technologies may eliminate all of the ills of the world. It will eliminate pollution. We'll be able to send bots into the atmosphere and they'll just chew up all those fluorocarbons in there. We'll be able to grow food anywhere on the planet. We will have pestilent-resistant, drought-resistant seeds. We will be able to take, Harari says, for example, that we'll be able to take a pile of garbage and reshape its molecular configuration and turn it into a standing rib roast. And by the way, and here's the best part, not only will it taste as good as a standing rib roast, it'll be healthy for you to eat. Not bad, huh? So what happens if this world of leisure actually materializes 100 years from now? What will the politicians promise us 100 years from now, if this is what life in the West is like? And oh, by the way, what about human relationships?
Why do you keep saying in the West?
Well, I mean the industrially advanced West. People who could afford these kinds, and that raises another problem, by the way. People who could afford these technologies versus people who can't afford these technologies. I just did a book review on a text that came out by a neuroscientist named Susan Schneider. And the title of the book is called Artificial You. And she wonders about how these technologies might change human beings. So we already have deep brain stimulators for people with Parkinson's disease and people with depression, right? Will the day ever come when we have, when we can put a chip in your hippocampus that'll ramp up your memory 10, 20 times? I mean, in terms of, and will we ever use these technologies as enhancement technologies? And she starts wondering, if you can start doing that, then at what point do we have people walking around out there who are no longer human, for heaven's sakes, because their computational skills are just so powerful? Will the day ever come when you can upload your consciousness? This is what Ray Kurzweil and the transhumanists like to think, that you can upload your consciousness onto a computer and then they can download it into a robot so that you can be immortal. But to get back to something a little more mundane, human relationships. There's a lot of literature on sex bots. Robots who perform sexual acts of gratification for people. And by the way, they never have erectile dysfunction. They never have a headache. Will we want to get married? Will marriage go, down the tank? Will we want to have children if we could live? So, I mean, these are just some of the crazy kinds of things that this, AI future may hold for us. And they're all, oh gosh, so I'll end on a depressing note. How many of you have heard of Fermi's paradox? So the way I learned it's like this, and I'm sure Harari discusses it. So Enrico Fermi figured out that given the vastness of the universe, that there have to be gazillions of worlds out there that have habitable, intelligent life. Most worlds do not, but there's got to be gazillions in the universe because the universe is just so enormous. Also, given the fact that there are so many likely habitable worlds out there, a lot of them have got to be housing people, entities that are super duper intelligence. That is to say, like us, but they got a start on us in terms of super intelligence of thousands of years, maybe 100,000 years. I mean, here I've been talking to you for the last hour about what's going to happen over the next 20 to 100 years. What about 1,000 years? What about 5,000 years? What about 10,000 years? What's going to look like if we make it? If we make it. And that's where Fermi's paradox comes in. So Fermi says, there are so many worlds out there that have to have super intelligent beings. How come we've never been visited? How come we don't have any conclusive evidence? There's never been a flying saucer that's landed on the White House Mall and a bunch of little people get out and say, take me to your leader. How come that's never happened? We don't have a leader. Thank you for that. Fermi's answer, there are, by the way, so Google Fermi's paradox and you'll get like 10 answers. And most of them are, it's because super intelligent people would never want to come to visit us on Earth. I mean, we're a bunch of schmucks here. I mean, you know, who would want to come here? Who would want to, I mean, we have nothing to offer. That kind of stuff. The chilling one is, though, we've never been visited because they're not out there. And the reason that they're not out there is that when they discovered superintelligence, it destroyed them. They weren't able to control it. And you know, if you think about this, there is a logic to that progression, because these AIs are going to start producing stuff that we're not going to be able to compute or handle. We're going to have to build more AI to handle the deliverables of the AI machine, and then pretty soon we're going to give up on that, and we're going to just let the AIs compute their own stuff and keep on going. So in other words, the trajectory is that we will end up in a world that is totally controlled by artificial intelligence. And when that day ever happens, at that point, I wish us all really good luck. Thank you all for. All right, in the back, and Sarah.
Who owns the data that makes AI possible? I know the oncologists at Sloan Kettering were selling the histologic library they had developed, and they got fired at it. So who owns the data that will make AI in medicine?
Right. So in healthcare, the data is generally owned by the people who generate the data. So healthcare professionals, Emory, Piedmont, Northside. Now there are public databases. NIH has a bunch of public databases up there, but it's a database like maybe for lung cancer or for whatever. What's fascinating though is that the academe who generates this data needs the private sector to massage the data, to interpret the data, because academic people, you know, it's kind of like those of you who've done pharmaceutical research. You develop the molecule in your lab, but you want to look to a pharmaceutical company to license it, to do all that kind of stuff with it. So there's going to be a collaboration. There is a collaboration, like you said. Well, MSK is kind of interesting because their leadership actually formed their own. I did a little bit of studying on that. They formed their own AI company called Page AI, which raises a whole bunch of conflict of interest problems there. But it generally comes from the people who generate the data. I mean, they're the original owners of it. Were you maybe getting at the fact that maybe I should own my data before Emory owns the data? Is that where you were going with this? And there's that conversation too. However, when I go to Emory, and if Emory does a bunch of imaging studies on me, I'm going to be asked to sign a form. Do I consent to allow these images to be used for research purposes by Emory? Once I do that, once I sign John Mann to that, Emory can use it any way they want. Right? I've essentially ceded to Emory the authority and the ownership of that, of my data. Oh, Don.
I have the mic. I'll give it to you later. John, one of the things that you're proposing here is almost an inevitability of all of this happening with no human opportunity to say, no, we don't want to go in this direction.
Right.
Look what the Germans tried. Look at what we did in the United States with the eugenics movement, which was taken over by Adolf Hitler.
Yeah.
We saw where all that led. I don't see much difference between what you're proposing than what was proposed
In other words,
conceptually, at the turn of the 20th century, and that led us into World War I and World War II and the subsequent consequences of that. Eventually, we had to say, no, we're not going there.
so for how many people does this control their lives? Right? I mean, and that's the great problem. Are we going to maintain control over this technology, or is it going to control us? I mean, what happens when you walk into your office in the morning and the computers are down? I mean, you may as well go home, right? So, and that's the scary part of of this kind of stuff. So lots is going on right now in terms. Oh man, and this actually segues us into a whole different conversation about what we should be doing to contain the potential harmfulness of these devices, right? Because it doesn't take much for a rogue nation to say, when Bush ordered the hit on Soleimani, NSA immediately started bracing for Iranian hackers. Because it happened just a few years ago. Sheldon Edelstein, who was the owner of the Sands Hotel in Vegas a couple years ago, said we should nuke Iran. And I don't know how long it was, weeks or months later, all of the computers in the Sands Hotel went down. And this is exactly what NSA was expecting after the hit on Soleimani. And by the way, it still might come, even though it didn't come. You don't have to build big missile silos if you want to hurt somebody with AI anymore. You can get a bunch of very, very smart people working in a garage. They can take down Hartsfield Airport. They can take down Wall Street. They can take down power grids. Okay? They can do that. So what kinds of international networks of communication are we going to need? Are our children going to need? Our grandchildren going to need in order to maintain a safe world? So.
It's coming.
Thank you.
Right.
This is actually more of a comment than a sorry. It's more a comment than a question. But there's a movie called I, Robot.
Yeah.
And,
good movie.
Well, the I, Robot is based on an Asimov short story, which I have actually read. It was hard to find. But in that one, it doesn't. There are not computers that actually take over the people's bodies. I mean, take over their, imprison them, and which is what happens in iRobot. What happens there is that the computers figure out the economies and construct the economies in such a way that individuals can't survive in those economies.
Huh. That individuals can't.
Individual companies cannot survive in the economies that the computers create. And that's the Asimov story, and that's where it ends.
Because the computers can envision a more sustainable economic future, according to their economic arrangements.
Computers can manipulate the variables so that if there's an up and coming company that challenges the computers, they can use their competitive power to get rid of that particular company.
Yep.
So my question was about, I think it was DeepMind that started in the UK, didn't it? Was the AI company? Wasn't DeepMind originally? I can't remember.
I don't know.
What the name, anyway, it was started by a Chinese scholar from the UK. And what he did was to set the AI, the machine, onto, it was pathology slides.
Mhm.
And maybe for eye, not retina, it was really path. And it wasn't sending pictures through that doctors had already read. It just said, go thou and find patterns. Help us diagnose. And they turned out to be remarkably helpful in areas that the pathologists hadn't really thought about. They hadn't seen the connections. And so I thought that was a more machines of loving grace kind of overview of, there may be ways that AI can solve these problems and develop the medications, can work on these things. However, as clever as this was, we don't have to worry anymore because now it belongs to Google. So this is what's going to happen. It's going to get bought up by somebody else, and who knows whether they're going to do evil like they promised or not. But it is interesting to think about letting AI solve the problems that come up.
And moreover, AI will solve the problem without theory. That's kind of fascinating, right?
Yes.
Because it's atheoretical, and all it's doing is just looking at these patterns, and it may. By the way, you were talking about this in science. That's what AlphaGo did with Lee Sedol. It at the 51st move or something like that, it came up with a new move. I mean, a move that no AlphaGo champion would have contemplated. And Sedol apparently was traumatized at that move, and he had to take a leave of absence for a week and just recover from what the machine did. But it found a new pattern. Right? It found a new solution to the problem. I think it's especially exciting in drug discovery. I think it's especially exciting when an AI, and again, you're going to need this massive computational power to look at a cancerous tumor, all right, and to look at the DNA of that tumor, and it's a human being's DNA, right, and to look at it in such a way to be able to then come up to reformulate a molecule that is precisely for that particular kind of cancer. That will be quite extraordinary when that day comes. And again, it's hard to imagine being able to do something like that without artificial intelligence.
So,
Mary.
Yeah, John, who are the biggest funders of AI research?
Yeah.
Because they're somewhat telling the direction this will go.
Right. So the biggest one
Funders.
is China. China is the biggest one. Okay. The book that you want to read, though, is called The Big Nine. And the Big Nine, they are the funders they're the big companies in the world. 6 Western, 3 Asian. The book is written by a woman named Amy Webb. And she spends probably a third of the book talking about China.
The other scary area is the military. We're designing.
I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
The military has been using AI for 50 years.
Yeah.
We had microphones scattered through the forest in Vietnam.
Yeah.
They went back to a computer in Colorado that distinguished between North Koreans who are migrating or deer or other. They made different sounds, and the computer picked
How
up
about that?
and said, North Vietnamese troops are coming through this forest. 5,000 miles away.
And that is the warfare of the future. We won't even be sending, I think, human soldiers into battle. We'll be sending drones, robots into battle. So DARPA is a big funder. I'll give you an interesting ethical issue that came up with either Google or Microsoft. The phenomenon was referred to as Project Maven. And DARPA gave a huge contract. It was either Google or Microsoft to develop AI weaponry. 3,000 employees signed a letter taken to Google or Microsoft leadership that said, we do not wish to be complicit in AI weapon research. And I mean, raises actually a bunch of interesting problems as to, how do you proceed with something like that, especially when DARPA comes to you with $1 billion contract. Are you going to turn that one away? So, like I say, just a series of kind of unprecedented type challenges. Are you going to honor that? I mean, one way that Google and Microsoft could handle that sort of thing is that they're interviewing. Would you, if you are hired by Google or Microsoft, consent to participating on research that may find its way into security and weaponry research in the United States? What do you say when an NSA representative or someone from DARPA says, I don't understand these Google employees not wanting to participate in this kind of research? Don't they realize that the people who hate us are doing exactly that kind of research? Don't they have don't they feel a patriotic obligation to get involved in research that defends this country? I mean, what do you do with that one?
So just a comment, which I'm sure people are familiar with, but last week I heard a lecture from a Humphrey Fellow at Rollins from Zimbabwe. So in his province, there are 3 doctors. Now that his wife and him are here, there's 1 doctor in his province. And they're training, they're giving computers to the community health workers.
Yep.
So more than telemedicine, but this AI can do this diagnostic work. And like you said, some of it may not, this could create more jobs for the AI company, because you could have these doctors here sitting there looking at those results.
Exactly right.
So if we're more of a globalist here,
and when that skin cancer AI study came out, that's exactly what a bunch of people said, that apparently half of the world's, half of the planet is without good dermatologists. And so now with this technology, all you need to do, but everybody's got a cell phone, right? So all you need to do is just take a picture of that skin lesion, send it halfway around the world, and within 24 hours, you'll get a read back for $2, by the way, on whether or not that's cancerous or not. So it will be marvelous. Great.
Thanks. I have a question here from Gretchen, who chatted in. And she heard you talk about iRobot, but she was asking if you would recommend any other movies, novels, or films that deal with a future in which AI of some sort and other tech advances dominate.
Yeah. So frankly, I don't watch too many of those movies, but one that I did see that did not get good reviews, but which I thought was kind of cool, was Johnny Depp's movie Transcendence. And this is where Depp uploads his consciousness. So the movie begins, he's dying, and he's this great computer genius, and he uploads his consciousness to a computer. And interestingly enough, the first thing that the uploaded consciousness wants to do is merge with the internet. It wants to know everything. Okay. And that's why people think that if we ever do reach the stage of artificial general intelligence, it'll be a relatively short step to super intelligence, because it might be easier to augment the intelligence of an already AI than it is to actually bring it to that, to that point. But this is all speculation, pie in the sky stuff. Sure.
Can I add to that? There is a play at the Alliance right now, a musical called Maybe a Happy Ending, that is about 2 bots and their relationship or the issues.
Yeah.
They tend to have problems because their parts get obsolete.
But
the distinction between what is human and what is not is very provocatively addressed in that play.
So, excuse me,
happening right now.
The movie Her,
yeah.
Joaquin Phoenix, right, who develops this close relationship with the voice of Scarlett Johansson. Yeah.
Well, this is 2 altogether. That's who it's about. Not human beings at all. They're robots.
Right.
And it's-
I think it's good. I think of those. It's much more interesting to think about humans and robots. A Japanese school teacher married a hologram a year or two ago. Not a legally recognized marriage, but he thought this. You could look this up on Google. I think it cost him $37,000. Had a nice wedding ceremony and all this kind of stuff. Said that this hologram was much more faithful, much more reliable, much more. He had to use a mannequin though in the actual ceremony because you can't put a ring on a hologram. So there's that. Don, you want that?
I think, if I remember correctly, John, computer scientists have a saying, garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
And you could build the best computer in the world, but if I don't agree necessarily with you that there's no concepts behind all this, because there are paradigms. There are paradigms of disease, and there are paradigms of social phenomenon. So if you're basing everything and building a piece of equipment and designing a computer program that happens to be based on an ineffectual paradigm, it's going to be leading you down bad pathways. And that, I think, may very well be part of parcel of what can happen with AI. They are paradigms. You talked about drug development. If you have the wrong concept of what a disease is, or the wrong concept of what is causing disease, everything is not DNA. A lot of environmental effects as well. And you spend billions of dollars developing it. Why does nothing work? But how many billions and billions of dollars? We have like 3 or 4 drugs, and they just deal with symptoms, not really cures. So they're based on computer models, and so I'm not quite convinced that it's as rosy.
I'll tell you another thing that I think about, and I'm not an engineering guy at all, but this is kind of fascinating. We appear to have reached the end of the age of silicon. I mean, our AIs work on silicon transistors now, right? And if we're ever going to get to that stage of artificial general intelligence, we're going to need something a heck of a lot better than and more powerful than transistors. So people talk about endomorphic programming, where maybe we're going to use something like electron spin or photons. But something that's going to carry us into the next technological age, because silicon won't do it. Frankly, as long as we stay a silicon-based AI economy, we're probably pretty safe. In terms of, again, just these models doing these narrow, focused kinds of tasks. So, yet another dimension of AI to watch.
But they're working on that at Georgia Tech.
You can bet it that they're working on it. You can bet that they're working on it. Great.
So one question for me, you mentioned about K through 12 education and STEM education and emphasizing that. That brings up, it seems like some dilemma, and I can't process how that's going to be, but if you look at distribution of any human ability, whether it's scientific or artistic or whatever, there's a broad distribution.
Yeah.
And so
I'm thinking of my 10-year-old grandson right now. I think I know where this is going.
So how's that going to work across the broad distribution of human abilities?
Gray, making predictions is hard, especially about the future. But how have human beings done it from the time our Cro-Magnon ancestors left the plains of Eastern Africa and started migrating? By making mistakes. And that's also a response to Don. That's the way we do it. That's the way we learn. We learn by plotting, by taking 1 step forward, 2 steps back, 3 steps forward, that kind of thing. It's the way we've always done it. The great threat of AI, though, is are we going to be able to keep doing it that way, or are we going to really mess it up, in the process?
So Gretchen asked another question: can AI be taught ethics?
As a matter of fact, it has to be taught ethics. Just like autonomous, I'll give Gretchen an example. Trying to figure that out with autonomous vehicles right now. right? So that autonomous vehicle is driving down a road and it suddenly I'm trying to think of just what happens to the car. The brakes fail or something like that. Yeah, the brakes fail.
No, there's a better situation. Encounters a group of school children.
I was going to say school
Does
children,
it swerve
nuns,
and say the
neuroscientists,
children- Does it not-
philosophy professors, right? And the autonomous vehicle has to figure out which ones do I hit.
And
Right.
remember that the AI has evolved since the time you installed it in the car. Whatever ethics you put into it, its ethical stance might well have changed. So you don't know what it's going to do.
Oh, because the AI may well keep developing its own ethics. That's a very good. So I would say to Gretchen, how about that part 2 of this? Let me say one thing. Not so much AI, human beings. We got to be morally enhanced as a human culture if these technologies are going to develop. To the extent that we develop these technologies that can take down Hartsfield Airport power grids, have jumbo jets flying into one another and all that kind of stuff, and there are still nations that hate us and want to destroy us out there, we're in big trouble. We're in big trouble. And that's one of the things, by the way, points that Harari makes in his book, that ultimately what we really should be thinking about is how to instantiate global peace in order to best ensure our chances that we're not going to fall the way of Fermi's paradox. Okay, John.
All right, the family, life, and religion going to survive AI. I'm worried.
That's
that
part
particularly
3.
If you do all this education through AI, it's going to destroy the family more than it is already destroyed.
Yeah.
And without families coming back the way they used to be 30 years ago, without political correctness and all this other garbage that basically generates the problems that we got today, I think we're going to, the religious life will not be what it is today.
Yeah.
I'm worried about it.
You worry about it, yeah. I might say in response to that, human beings have been constantly restructuring and refashioning the fabric of their relationships for the last 100,000 years. So, Malin.
Can you help? Could AI help us understand economies and what are optimal ways to get to certain results? We're now sitting on little ticking time bombs.
Yeah. That's one of the scary parts.
There must be a lot of interest
Yeah.
in flying up there. And
Well-
also you think about what do we need, how much socialism,
Ah.
how much capitalism, how much various combinations of combinatorial.
How much market manipulation, right? Right? And because a lot of people think that AI is going to be the great economic panacea, that it will keep us from global economic disasters, because just leave it up to the AI to control Wall Street, right? And control world economies.
I'm thinking of using it to try to get to a certain end. In other words, what would be the right combination?
Yeah. I think that for me, the big problem is what kind of political arrangements do you need to make that happen? You know?
Well, then you have to translate.
Yeah.
How do you do it? I mean, we're heading
Sir?
I'm wondering, what other events in human history that have been so significant?
Right.
Enough said, I'll do it.
Jumps out at you as you look back over time?
I'm glad you asked that question. Did you all hear it? What other events in human history equate to what we're looking at here with AI? And the answer is none. That's the answer. None.
What about writing?
Writing?
Language. What about languages?
Well, I mean, I guess we could.
Or the public, or book publication, 15th century.
Yeah. That's
I mean, I realize we're talking about things of a different scale.
Yeah.
But what we can look at, it seems to me, is what did we seem to do with the, how has this worked itself out in human society?
You know, that's lovely that you would say writing. Steven Pinker, who's kind of a competitor with Harari here as in terms of public intellectuals, said that he thinks that one of the greatest growth spurts in achieving an ethical consciousness occurred when people learned how to read, or when large swaths of the population began able to read novels. Okay, and they began to experience the world of other people and think about sadness and happiness and justice and all of these kinds of things. Relatively recent phenomenon in the history of the West, maybe 17th century, 18th century, when again large populations of people could read. By the way, the church fathers didn't want large populations of people to read, right? Okay, so that might have been epical, but I think this is the problem with AI. And what we think about in ethics is, in ethics, we think about relationships, and we think about them three ways. We think about the relationship of the human being to himself, relationship of a human being to other human beings, and the relationship of human being to his or her environment. And the thing is, AI is going to change all of those. Yeah, yeah.
Has been very important. The relationship of what we can't see but believe. The mystery piece of this.
Okay.
Now, have we eliminated the mystery piece? Although the way that you began this almost suggests no, but what is the what?
Yeah, that's a lovely thought, and I've given it some consideration. And this is the way I phrase it. It's obvious to us that monkeys can't understand Shakespeare. We take that as a given. Right? We don't think about that with regard to human beings, though, right? We think we could understand and learn everything, right? Well, maybe some of this stuff, is beyond, right, our understanding, right? So, are there certain questions we will never be able to answer? However, a much more scary thought was to put Neil deGrasse Tyson, our great public intellectual, was asked, "What do you worry about?" And he answered, kind of in your vein. He said, "I worry about what I don't know." And that is really worrisome, especially going back to hackers, to people who would wish to destroy us. Because the problem with AI is it's only limited by human imagination. And the more imaginative, the more awful, the more awful scenarios you can cook up, the more people might pursue them. So, you see what a multi-headed hydra this whole thing is. That's what's so scary about it. There's so many features of it.
One question that comes up to me, especially when you talk about family and also population controlling jobs and things like that. What about population control and limiting it, or?
Yeah, I mean, what exactly? What are we going to? Even going to John's point, what the nature of the family? I mean, if AI allows us to have all these leisures and luxuries, as everybody in this room knows, life is difficult, right? And by the way, I picked up a book by Scott Peck. Remember him, Road Less Traveled? Just happened to open it up to a random page, and Peck said there's only 2 reasons to get married. Only 2. Number 1, to have them beget children. Number 2, to experience the irritation of an intimate relationship. Now, right or wrong, huh? Is that right or wrong? That guy's right on the money, right? The irritation of an intimate relationship. That's perfect. Well, guess what? With AI, you don't need any more irritation. You don't need any more irritation. What's going to happen if that day ever comes?
Problems are solved, and we need population growing, which is overrunning the country, the earth.
And our great-grandchildren, maybe, are going to have to deal with that one. What happens if you wake up in the morning and you don't need anything because everything is already there? You need nothing.
Well, I'm talking about what we're doing to the environment also.
Yeah, well, the environment will be taken care of.
Tell that to locusts.
So what?
tell that to the locusts, the devastating parts of Africa.
We'll take care of all that stuff. You need to invite Ray Kurzweil to give a talk. He is the eternal optimist.
He's not.
Ray, what is our, do we have a hard stop here? Or?
Yes, I was gonna say, it's really time, unfortunately, to stop. This could go on forever, but we have a 1 o'clock, so I think we need to sort of stop and thank John so much for being here.
Stuff.